Clear the lift. Quick march! Get your square bashing boots on, because this week we're marching back through 2,000 years of Colchester's garrison history. Back to the time when real men wore leather skirts. Right, here's your first riddle. Of course, those of you who've had the benefit of a classical education and have got a working knowledge of Roman and Greek history, you may want to shove off to the fridge and grab yourself a beer, because this one's going to be a doddle for you. The rest of you, you may just want to get your thinking caps on. In the history of that fine and ancient town, Colchester, what do you think is the significance of an elephant? A she-elephant, a cow. A camel. A hippo. And a pair of hobnail boots.
Rockety! Take! Deck, 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 then deck.
Enter the Emperor Claudius. Decent enough bloke for a Roman with a stammer and a limp. The worst that could be said of him was he was a historian. Now, after his troops had fought a brief and bloody campaign against the ancient Brits, Claudius was given the nod, and over he came to lead the final assault and victory parade into Colchester, the soon-to-be capital of his new imperial province, Britannia. And he didn't come alone. Salute. Oh, good girl. Good girl. Of all the absolutely fabulous things that Claudius brought with him to Britain to impress the natives, this is the one that knocked the woad clean off their bellies. The African elephant, the Roman war elephant. And the people in Britain had never seen anything like it in their entire lives. How much would they have intimidated people in warfare?
I think they would have been extremely intimidating. They weren't always the most reliable creature in the world, particularly if the mahout was killed, the guy that used to, in effect, drive the elephant. Yeah. If he was killed, then they would lose all direction. They would have no idea what side they were on, and they would just go pummeling their way through anybody and everybody.
Stomping through whatever got in the way.
Yeah. But as a war animal, they were used to hold archers. They had these great baskets on their back.
Like a small castle on the top.
Yes, that's right. And they would use archers, lancemen, people with slingshots as well for them. They could even be used to build scaffolding on their backs as well to get into enemy fortresses.
Oh, right, to stand them under the walls.
Yeah, yeah.
Didn't know that. And of course, they wear armour as well, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they wore...
Mamular armour, I think it was called.
They wore this...
Thank you very much. Bitten all over.
Always been curious to know exactly how he managed to bring them over.
Caligula, being sort of quite balmy, had built a special galley to bring a 140-foot-long obelisk across from North Africa. And of course, the galley was still sitting there in the harbour at Ostia. And when they said, "How are we going to get the elephants there? It's going to take months to take them across the Alps and through Gaul." Someone said, "Oh, well, what about the old galley that mad Caligula built?" Fine, they said, "Let's use that." And that's what they did. Thank you. That's the elephant part of our riddle dealt with. Ah, but what about the camels, says you? Well, they were here too, says I. Claudius, bless him, brought the first camels to Great Britain. The thing is, with these magnificent creatures bouncing around the English countryside, they didn't really get much of a look in, understandably. Which just leaves us with the hippo. Hippo is the Greek word for a horse, and this military gravestone shows a Celtic warrior cowering beneath the all-conquering cavalry commander. And though the horseman was literally defaced during Boudicca's revolt against Rome, the horse was very carefully left intact, because the Celts, just like the Romans, loved horses. You see, hippos occasionally made their appearance in the Roman arena. They'd flood the arenas and they'd stage mock sea battles in them for the edification of the mob. And just to spice things up a little bit, they would put hippopotamuses, or is it hippopotami, into the water so they could gobble up the people who were trying to swim for it. Very fierce creatures are hippos. But this is a different type of hippo. This is a hippo sandal. Oh, this isn't though. Hang on, it's in here somewhere. Ah, there she be. This is a very early form of horseshoe. You see, horses or oxen, which carried the big draft wagons in the Roman Empire, would have these tied, not nailed, but tied to their feet. And leather straps would go through these little holes here, and they would tie round the leg of the animal, the horse or the oxen, to the back, and they'd be cross-tied here to keep it secure. So on slow-moving draft animals, you could protect their very tender feet from the hard surfaces of a Roman road. And very lucky we are to be allowed to play with this, because the hippo sandal is very rare. Meanwhile, Centurion Appian Glorious and the lads were stamping the Celts into some sort of order. The native Brits weren't best pleased at the prospect of imperial rule. And it wasn't long before Rome realized that the only way it could bestow the benefits of civilization on us poor, benighted barbarians was to batter and bludgeon us into submission. And that's where these boys come into the picture. This is literally the cutting edge of Roman imperial innovation. The foot soldiers of the Second Augusta. And so to the final piece of the riddle, the hobnail boots. The hobnails, when did they first come in?
You find them actually sort of, certainly long before the Romans come to Britain. The caligae actually were worn by workmen as well, but also hobnails were worn by both men and women in their shoes. So even though you might have a woman's shoe which is quite delicate on the top, you might still have hobnails underneath.
How comfortable are these?
They're quite comfortable because your feet don't sweat very much because you've got lots of air going through them and such like.
Yeah, nicely ventilated.
Yeah, but what you do tend to notice is that your soles and your calves ache most because you've got no cushion. So it's pound, pound, pound if you're marching on roads.
You know this business about nail money, clavarium?
Yes.
Because they had to pay for the boots themselves.
That's right, yes, they paid all for your own equipment.
That's right, and they claimed nail money when they had excessive marching to do. Because as you can see, wears them down.
Yes, yes. Although at one point they claimed it because they, I think it was between Ostia and Rome, they had to march and they were continually wearing out their hobnails. So the emperor said, well, march barefooted instead.
And did they?
I've got no idea, I don't know what the rest of the story is.
Well, there you are. That's the last part of our riddle. There's the answer. The hobnail boots, or caligae, to give them their proper name. Another riddle. Why do you think a dancing master with a wonky leg would be all on fire at the thoughts of Romans doing wheelies up and down the Great North Road? This is Colchester's new link road. Of course, it got its first one nearly 2,000 years ago when the legions built the road network. Roads that won their wars and maintained the Pax Romanus, the Roman peace. I planned to show you, before the wind got up, how the major trunk roads of... you just have to take my word for it. How the major trunk roads of this country still follow much the same route that the Roman engineers chose when they drove the first roads out across these islands 2,000 years ago. You see, Britannia may well have been the most remote of all Rome's provinces, but there was no way that it was isolated, far from it, because the Romans knew that it was the road network that tied the entire empire together. That's why they said, all roads lead to Rome. Now that's something to think about the next time you're stuck in traffic on the A12, passing the time with a game of I Spy the Agger. What do you mean, what's an agger? Oh, all right, I'll build you one. Would you say you had a little bit of road experience? I mean, I'm looking for experienced men here, you know. Don't want a couple of new boys.
No. You've got two of the best, I think.
Right, Roman roads, dead simple. You dug out 2 ditches, like that, maybe 20 feet apart. They then piled the spoil into the centre. No, you see, you're doing it your way, you say. No, I want it done Roman fashion.
Oh, yes.
In the middle, please, in the middle. It's getting there, it's getting there.
Well, there's the beginning of the agger.
They brought along the big stones, which were then placed on top. And then when all that was done and tamped down and nice and solid, they'd then get the finer gravels and they'd grade the gravels, maybe 5 or 6 different grades of gravels, which would all gradually get smaller and smaller. In Rome and in Italy, what they then did was they paved that with big paving slabs. And of course, this the other thing is, where'd you get all that really big pieces of gravel? It's not lying around at the side of the road. They have to bring that in from miles and miles away.
Well, to be honest, 50% of our stone that we've actually imported in to build our new road has come from Cork in Ireland, and that's come from ships down into the local dock, and then it's shipped up on lorries to here.
So still the same problems?
Yeah. The drawing you've drawn there, and I could take you into my office and show you a typical cross-section, and it's more or less identical to that to this day.
I mean, their use of technology, I just find astonishing. And just a little finishing touch. Some Roman legionaries on the road, marching off to victory. And now, the wonderful tale of Mr. John Ogilby, who in an age of colourful characters contrived to be known as a colourful character. Cosmographer to His Gracious Highness King Charles II of blessed memory. All this will be explained in due course. No, a cosmographer doesn't do horoscopes. He was a man who made maps. And this is the story of the one who mapped the road from Norwich to London. John Ogilvy was born in 1600 in the dark outlands of Scotland, Dundee, home of the Dundee cake. Don't eat it all. Now, his father decided to improve the family's prospects by bringing them all south to London. Bad move. He ended up being put in prison for debt, forcing poor old John out onto the streets, selling spangles. That's cheap, dodgy jewellery to me and thee. But the bad luck that plagued John throughout his entire life always seemed to be balanced with equal pieces of good luck. Now, John, bless him, used his hard-earned cash to purchase a lottery ticket. There were dozens of them around in those days, and he had the great good fortune to actually win. He won sufficient money to clear the family debts and spring his old man from the clink. That was the name of the debtor's prison. And he had just enough money left over to purchase himself an apprenticeship with a prominent dancing master. Unfortunately, this is the bad luck, performing a particularly tricky arabesque, he fell and shattered his ankle. For the rest of his life, he would walk with a limp. So, with his career as a dancer over before it had even begun, John Ogilvy decided on a new career. He would be a dancing master. He took himself off to Dublin. Did very well, thank you very much. Built himself a nice little theatre. Was even invited to take up the very prestigious post of Deputy Master of the King's Revels, a sort of full-time party organiser for royalty. However, the bad luck, as you'll guess, was on its way. In 1641, there was an Irish rebellion. But Ogilvy was in luck. He managed to get away high, wide and handsome. As he crossed the Irish Sea, he must have clapped his hands with delight. Sailing down the coast of Wales, he was giggling for sheer joy and relief. And as they put about to get round the coast of Cornwall, he was shipwrecked. Somewhere off the islands of Scilly. Once again, dearest John found himself with his bottom hanging out of his breeches. So he did what any sensible soul did in the 17th century. He renewed his fortunes by marrying a rich widow. Catch, girls. Now came the bad luck. His wealthy and immensely powerful patron, the Earl of Strafford, was executed by the king for treason. Back to square one. Now, while His Majesty and Mr. Pepys were up on Hampstead Heath watching Mr. Halley's comet soar over their heads, Mr. John, my middle name's Bad Luck Ogilvy, sat there in black despair thinking, oh no, I'm doomed. But he was wrong. Just this once his luck was in. Within the year, as plague ravaged the city, he managed to scuttle off to the countryside and survive. The bad luck came when he came back to town in 1666. Cue the Great Fire of London, please, gentlemen. Watch this. Oh, no, cried Mr. Ogilvy as the fire consumed his house and his fortune. But I tell you, you just couldn't keep this man down. He was irrepressible. While the ashes were still smouldering, he managed to get himself appointed to the team that was to assess the damage to the capital. And as he surveyed the wreckage of the city, he must have surveyed the wreckage of his own life. And then it hit him. Of course, surveyor. That's what I'll do next. That's how I'll restore my fortune. I'm telling you, this guy had more bounce than Nell Gwyn. Right, that's Ogilvy's life story. Biff Vernon is going to give me a bigger scale version of just how he made his maps. We met up at Whittlesford just off the A11.
He was the first person to really map out the roads in a systematic way and do it accurately.
There was nothing that actually had the roads and the miles beside them. This was the first one, wasn't it?
That's right, this was John Ogilvy's real innovation.
How did he do that? What did he actually, how did he get that information?
He sent out teams of surveyors with a dimensurator.
That's right.
Like the modern trundle wheel, but a sophisticated instrument with dials that measured the chains, the furlongs, the miles.
Because the wheel had been around since Roman times, hadn't it?
Not so sophisticated. This was a bit of precision instrument making, and it was a very accurate thing.
What I find amazing are the signs. I mean, there are so many symbols he uses on this, which they're still using 350 years later.
With very little change.
Yeah.
The windmill symbol, as you say, is pretty much the same. Where there's pieces of woodland, a green background, with little trees drawn on, and those trees are pretty much the same as you get on a modern OS map.
It is 350 years
Yep.
later.
Yep.
They're still using the same symbols.
Very, very similar.
If you look at Ogilvy's London road map south of Cambridge and compare it with a modern map of what's now the B1368, they look remarkably similar. Barkway, Barley, Royston, they're all there. What we want to do is see how the town of Whittlesford measures up these days. Back in the late 1600s, Ogilvy marked a river crossing, a couple of buildings and an obvious landmark. A church with a spire. Well, that's definitely still there. It's the Church of St Mary's and St Andrews.
Well, there's Whittlesford.
With the spire sign.
Absolutely.
The only problem with that is I'm not convinced that that spire's 17th century. It looks an awful lot later.
Well, sometimes spires fell down.
Sometimes, frequently. Mind you, the other thing, he's very fastidious about mentioning his towers and spires, but he's been equally fastidious in not mentioning the carving over the window. Can you make it out?
I don't think there would have been room for that on the map, but yes, there's a nice little...
It's a Shallow gig. It's a very, very rude carving. There's only 5 of them in the whole of England, and it was because the priesthood were becoming celibate. And one of the reasons that they were putting these carvings in churches, they were keen to show people just how evil women were, how women could come between a man and his salvation. But what about the little red buildings Ogilvy marked on his map? Well, there's one still standing that's a likely enough candidate.
So this building is presumably on the map.
There certainly was a building here in Ogilvy's day, but he wasn't really interested in the buildings themselves. He was interested in the road. Where there were buildings, he marked them, but he wasn't particularly interested in their accuracy. This is Ogilvy's Road, London to Norwich.
We're on the main London to Norwich Road. This is all that's left of one section of it. And this is where the bridge was.
Straight ahead of us, there's the River Cam.
Of course, Ogilvy's massive maps were designed for a rich man's library, and it was to be 40 years before a portable road atlas appeared, the ancestor of the ones we still use today.